I'll be using the following materials to put this dress together. I have my fabric of choice, which is this lovely green and pink ankara. I have 2 meters of that. I also got a matching satin lining and I ended up using about 2 meters. I have a long dress zip that is about 20 to 25 inches long. I have skinny elastic, which I'm going to be incorporating into my sleeve later on in this video, my fabric, scissors, my marker pen, my tape measure to take down my measurements, some pins, as well as my pattern master. So for this dress design, I worked from my one shoulder dress plan, which I have done in a previous tutorial. I'm going to link down below because it just saved a lot of time. Instead of making this plan from scratch, I just grabbed that plan, altered it a little bit for this dress. I had my front as well as my back with all of the dots and necessary lines already marked in place, so please see that video first if you want to actually make this dress from scratch. So I'm going to be grabbing my front dress plan and we're going to be drawing in the cutout shape. You can make it as wide as you want to, you can make it curved, but just keep in mind that you want it high enough to cover your bra or your underwear. So I measured from my nipple downwards and I marked it along that dot on that side. So that is a guide for me when I'm drawing in the shape of my cutout like so. So I drew it first with a pencil and I went ahead to refine my lines with my marker pen and my set square. Just make sure you do with pencil first until you are happy before you actually commit with a pen that you can't erase. So after that, I went ahead to shape my dot, which is right above the cutout here. I wanted it to be nice and snug underneath my bust, so I took in that dot in by about 1 centimeter. So my cutout is going to ride up high and sit along the waistline of this dress. So that is where like the opening of the detail is going to be. For the hemline, I wanted something asymmetrical and I made one side longer by about 5 centimeters on 2 inches and the other side shorter by 3 centimeters or about 1 inch. This is totally optional, but I just wanted the hemline to have more character and personality. So once that is done, that is the main sort of alterations or changes that I did to my original one shoulder dress plan. And because I wanted quite a few paneling, because I wanted the top of the dress to be fitted, I'm going to be ending up with 6 pattern pieces for my front, 3 for the top and 3 for the bottom. Having panels like that can be painful to sew, but once you've marked everything and you know what goes with what, especially with notches in place, it's actually not that bad, I promise. Once you're happy with your front plan, you can go ahead and trace out the different front panels, add your seam allowance so that it's ready to be cut onto fabric. So these are my pattern pieces laid down flat. Make sure to add your notches, annotations, your grain line and how many pieces you would need of each. Because this is an asymmetric dress, you only need to cut 1 piece for each panel of the front. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer my style lines for the cutout as well as the hemline onto my back. I'm transferring the shape of the cutout onto the back as well. You can decide to change this or make it shallower if you wanted to. I just decided to work with the same sort of shape on the front and on the back. I'm also transferring the hemline of the dress as well, ensuring that it's the same on the front and on the back. Don't forget to shape that dot that sits just above that cutout detail, because the last thing you want to happen is to have sort of a loose seam or a loose space above a cutout. It just takes away from the beauty of having that shape there. So this is what my back dress plan looks like. I'm going to trace out my back patterns and add my seam allowance like I did for the front, starting with either the top or the skirt / bottom of this dress. So I ended up with 6 pattern pieces for the back. For the back of this dress, I decided to have 2 pieces for the bottom and just have like a normal dart instead of having separate panels. And then for the top half of the dress, I ended up with 4 panels because I wanted a seam through the center back, which would allow me to shape the dress nicely as well. So the next thing we're going to be working on is the ruffle, which sits along the hem of the dress, and I'm going to be using the circle skirt method, which I've done in a previous tutorial. So if you haven't seen that already, please go ahead and check that out. You need to calculate the radius in order to draw in the shape of a circle skirt, and when I did my calculations, I ended up with 6.5 inches. So you need to measure the entire hem of the dress. That will become your circumference, and if you apply that into finding the radius of a circle formula, you'll be able to end up with your own measurement. So I'm just going ahead to connect my dotted points to make the inner part of this circular shape like so, and the length of the ruffle is 6 inches. I decided to work with sort of an even length because the hemline of the dress is asymmetric, so it would affect how this ruffle actually sits on the garment. So once you are drawing in all of your necessary lines, your grain lines, annotating what point is necessary, I'm going to cut out this pattern piece. The cool thing about cutting a circle skirt in this method is you save paper, 1, and 2, when you're ready to cut this onto fabric, you fold your fabric twice, so you have 2 folded ends, and when you cut the pattern on that folded piece, you end up with a whole circle. So these are all of my pattern pieces, quite a few I must say, and for the main dress you need to cut in your main fabric as well as in your lining. You also need a basic sleeve for one shoulder of the dress. I have a basic sleeve tutorial which I will link down below as well. You could also decide to trace around the sleeve of any of your favorite dresses to incorporate into this project. Just keep in mind that when you're cutting asymmetric styles, you would need to be aware of the side of the pattern you are cutting with. So if you are cutting with the right side of the pattern for your front pieces, you have to flip the back patterns to the reverse side when you're cutting that. If you don't do that, what will happen is you're going to end up with pieces that do not match together. I learned this the hard way, so I just wanted to make you guys aware of that if you are going to be making this yourself. So once you are done cutting out all of your pieces, do not forget to add your notches. Because this dress has quite a few panels, notches are going to become very crucial when you're actually joining everything together. So these are all of the pieces I ended up with. I have my ruffle piece down here like so, which is a whole circle. I also have my bodice piece for the front and for the back. I have my skirt pieces for the front and the back as well as one sleeve that matches with the shoulder that has a sleeve. That is very important to keep in mind. I also have my lining pieces which I cut using the top and the bottom pieces of the dress. Time to sew. The first thing I'm going to be starting with is joining the front pieces as well as the back pieces all together, so we have a whole lot to work with for the front and for the back. So sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is the amount of seam allowance I added on my pattern. If you added 1/2 inch, remember to stitch on that seam allowance as well. Whatever you added, just remember to work with that. So I've sewn up all of my front and all of my back pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and pin them together along the shoulder and the side. Remember to only stitch up the side that has the cutout detail. The other side is where your zip is going to be. So I went ahead to sew that up and press my seams open and flat, ready to be joined to my skirt. For the skirt pieces, I'm going to be joining up my front pieces together because I have 3 panels for my front. I'm going to be closing up those seams, and then I'm going to be working on the back afterwards. Now sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance using a normal straight stitch, I am joining up all of my front skirt panels, so I have that ready to be attached to the back of my dress. So now that we have our front pieces done, you can see the hemline coming together really nicely. I have my back skirt pieces in place and I'm going to be transferring my darts. I use my very easy method of using a pin to poke a hole through the pattern onto the fabric and then mark that point with a chalk. So I'm going to do this for the left and for the right hand side, and because we've already cut notches indicating where the dart sits along the waistline, I'm just pinning the point where the end of the dart is and align that to the dart along the waistline. So I've pinned the dart for the left and for the right hand side, and I'm just sewing both darts, remembering to do a back stitch at the end or tie a knot if that's what you prefer. So now that we have our back dart stitched and ready to go, we're going to be sewing up the center back seam and joining up the longer side of the skirt. You will leave the shorter side open because that is where your zip is going to sit. So now I'm just sewing up the center back as well as the side seam, so I have this ready to be joined to the bodice of the dress. So this is what the skirt looks like at this point. I went ahead to press all of my seams nice and flat, and then I'm grabbing my bodice or the top half of the dress, and we're going to be joining the ends, leaving the middle open. So this is open sideways, and I'm going to be joining up that part for the front and the other part for the back, remembering to leave the main cutout detail, which is sort of in the middle of this, open, and that is what you'll be attaching to your lining later on in order to finish off that part of the dress nice and neatly. Okay, so I have pinned the dress on just to check that I like how the cutout detail looks on the side. Call my bones. Actually, I'm not mad at this so far. There's just a little bit of room there that I think I would taking through this seam. That was just a little bit loose on the bottom, but I am happy with the width of this cutout here. If it was any higher, my bra would have been showing underneath, so that is actually perfect. I like the length as well, because then the ruffle would just end just above my knee on this side and it cover this knee on this other side. I really like the neckline. I think that's just the star of the show. The neckline is really pretty. I love it. Oh, this looks really good even on the back. Like, it just sits nice and smoothly on the back as well. I think it's a dress that I won't be able to wear just yet because it's a bit cold, but I think in the summer or when I go on holiday, this would be such a nice holiday piece. I just pinned up this side. I hope you can't see my underwear, but I pinned up this side because this is where I'm going to be fixing the zip on the side seam so I can get in and out of the dress. But yeah, this is what it looks like so far. What do you guys think? I'm going to go ahead and finish it up and add the sleeves, do the lining, add the ruffle, and then sort of like folding the hem of the ruffle and the hem of the sleeve. But so far so good. For the sleeve, I wanted something simple with a twist, and I went ahead to cut out a basic sleeve that matches that side of the dress, and I'm going to be drawing in 2 vertical lines that are 4 inches from the sleeve edge. So for this vertical line here, as you can see, I'm matching that with the sleeve edge 4 inches away, and I'm using my set square to draw in a line with a chalk. I'm going to do this for the other side of the sleeve, and I'm going to be cutting an elastic that is at least 2 inches shorter than the length of that vertical line. By the time I was done stitching the sleeve, I realized that I only ended up using, I don't know, about 3/4 of the elastic. I ended up cutting off a lot more, which means that if you're cutting your elastic here, it can be 5 inches to 6 inches shorter than this vertical line here, because the more you pull that elastic, the more the sleeve is going to ruche up. So as you sew, remember to pull your elastic, do your back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and this is what your sleeve should look like. If you want a longer sleeve that has this ruched up detail, the original sleeve that you cut should be longer as well. So I'm going to be going ahead to sew up that side seam close. I'm stitching on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I just thought doing the elastic detail first before sewing up the side seam would make things a lot easier for me. So once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and overlock my seam close because I don't want anything to be unraveling inside of this dress. So once that is done, I'm going in again to overlock the hem of the sleeve because we're going to be turning that over and stitching it on later in this video. So for the lining of the dress, you essentially use the same patterns to cut the lining, but whatever direction you cut your main dress in, you do the reverse for the lining pieces. You see the way I've sewn my lining now? This is actually wrong, and I had to finesse the lining to work with the dress somehow. But if you want to save yourself from that headache, do the cutting of your lining in the reverse manner of how you cut your main dress. I just hope that made sense. Asymmetric dresses can be so beautiful but can be very tricky to stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and join the lining to the main dress along that cutout or hole detail. As you can see here, I've just pinned everything down in place, and I'm going to be sewing from one point going my way all around on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And when I get to either of the two corners of the cutout detail, I'm going to leave my needle in and then turn the garment in the direction that I want to continue sewing in, like so. Drop my footer and then keep sewing until I arrive at the end of that seam. After doing this, I went ahead to do a slim edge stitch that would hold that lining on the inside of the garment. This is optional, but I like doing edge stitches like this because it tucks that lining inside and it just keeps it intact. After that, you can go ahead and give your garment a nice press, and if you want to prevent the seam from bulking up along the edges, you can go in and trim your seams even shorter. Next up, we're going to be joining the dress to the lining along the neckline like so. So because we've joined up one side of the garment, we're going to be sewing the shoulder from either the back all the way to the front or vice versa, whichever you prefer. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to be taking this to my machine and we're going to be sewing up the lining to the dress. I'm sewing on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, remembering to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Because I did my lining in a wrong way, I had to really pull and tug things to fit, but if yours is done correctly, this should be relatively straightforward to stitch in place. Yet again, I went ahead to do my edge stitch, which keeps my lining tucked inside. Go ahead and give your neckline a nice press because this is one of the parts of the garment that will be on show and you want it to look really nice and clean while you wear your dress. So once that is done, the next thing we'll be doing is to attach the zip. I'm going to be working with a normal dress zip, and the way I like to do this is I mark the point where I want my zip to end along that seam, and then I pin the seam in such a way that I close it up from the bottom all the way to that point that I want my zip to stop. So now that I've stitched that in place, you can go ahead and pin your zip open into the seam or the open end of this side like so. So I'm going to be using my zip footer, which is a slimmer footer compared to the normal footer that my machine comes with, and I'm going to be sewing each side of the zip into each side of this open seam like so. So sewing ever so slowly from the top all the way to the bottom. I like to sew a little bit beyond the point where the seam actually like stops, so it just keeps the zip intact. I did this for the left and for the right hand side, and this is what my zip looks like. I'm just checking to see that I'm happy with everything. You can go ahead and overlock those seams or use bias binding to finish up that seam where your zip actually sits. Next up, we're going to be fixing the sleeve into the armhole of the dress. I'm just going ahead to pin it in place. I like to add at least 2 to 3 pins when I'm sewing in sleeves. One at the side seam, one at the sleeve head or the shoulder point, and then one where the notches are on the front and for the back. You can add a few more if you just want everything to stay put while you make your way to your machine to sew. So now I'm going to stitch my sleeve into the armhole of the dress on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, not forgetting to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. I ended up adding a few more pins because of the ruching that the sleeve had as a result of the elastic that we added. So once I get to the end, I'm going to take this to my overlocker and I'm going to be overlocking that seam closed because I don't want anything to unravel even on the inside of my garment. So once that is done, we can go ahead to work on the sleeve hem. I'm just folding the sleeve hem in by 1 centimeter and just stitching this in place. So now that we have the rest of the garment done, the last thing to do is to attach the ruffle detail which sits on the hem of the dress. So because the ruffle doesn't have any seams on the side, we can just go ahead and pin this circular piece into the hemline of the dress. I already put notches for the side seam when I was cutting the ruffle, and that made pinning it really quick to do. So I'm sewing now on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, joining my ruffle piece to the hem of my dress. As you can see, I overlocked the lining to the main dress, so that just holds both layers in place and makes sewing the ruffle into the hem of the dress a lot quicker. After that, I'm going in to overlock my seam to keep it intact, and once that is done, you can go ahead and fold and stitch the hemline of your ruffle to finish off the dress. You can either fold the hem twice or you can overlock it once like I'm doing and then fold it once. With that, the dress is finished. It took quite a bit of time for me to make, but I am really happy with the end result. It fits like a dream. It's one of those dresses that I know I would really enjoy when I'm on holiday and when it's nice and warm. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts, suggestions and ideas down below, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Have a good morning, afternoon and evening wherever you are. Bye.